Welcome to Answers with Autumn. And today we are joined by Katie Nelson, one of our incredible attorneys here at the AWB firm. We're so glad you've joined us. Today's topic is your business built on legal sand? How the wrong entity structure could be costing you profit, protection, and peace of mind. Couple of housekeeping things before we start. Of course, we are lawyers. We are not your lawyers unless you work with the AWB firm. So nothing in this training is legal advice, it's just information. Everything we're going to talk about is going to be based on U.S. law. We are both licensed to practice in Tennessee. And we will say this 100 times because this is a kind of tax and finance heavy topic. We do not specialize in tax. So we are definitely not giving tax advice. If this brings something up for you, please check with your CPA or other tax advisor. We also don't do patent law, but that's not going to come up today. All right, so you are in the right place if you're here with us live or watching the replay, whether you're a client, a referral partner, or you're just exploring how you might want to scale your business smarter. What we are covering today is going to help any online business who is growing through that 6 to 7 figure mark. Now, if your structure was set up when you were just getting started, it might be holding you back. Or even worse, it could be exposing you to risks that you just aren't aware of and can't see yet. So that is what we want to help with today, is giving some visibility to those risks, helping you make good decisions. So we're recording this in April 2025. We just wrapped up tax season. And I don't know about you, but I have seen a lot of chatter in Facebook groups, in my Voxer chats about entity structure, which sounds so boring. But coming off of tax season, everyone's like, do I need to be an S-Corp? Did I overpay on my taxes? Are there things that I could do to help next year go more smoothly? So this is a great time, while it's top of mind, to start thinking about those things. So a couple questions that we're seeing: what am I missing that could come back to bite me? Is my current setup quietly putting me at risk? Or what can I fix now to help me keep more revenue and profit later? So the challenges that we are seeing here at the AWB firm, we work primarily with 7 and 8 figure businesses. We are getting questions about whether the entity structure still fits their current business. Again, if it was set up a while ago, or maybe they set it up themselves. They're just not sure if it still makes sense. We've had a lot of questions about S-Corps, as I mentioned, people hearing their friends talk about them, but they don't know what it means or if it is important to them. Their tax bill, it may have been higher than they anticipated, especially if they are not working with a CPA or a tax advisor like our favorites who help you plan for those things. So you may be wondering, are you missing out on things? This is also a time of year, spring going into summer, when folks might be planning a move. And so as you are maybe changing states, are there things that you need to do with your entity? And then always we get questions about these Delaware and Wyoming companies. What are they? Do I need one? So I am going to toss some questions to Katie, and we're going to go back and forth on some of these hot topics. So Katie, let's start with the basics. What even is a business structure, and how does it impact my business?
Sure. Thanks, Autumn. I'm glad to be here today. So your business structure, that really is the framework for how your business is organized. So typically when someone's talking about like what your business structure is, you're either talking about being a sole proprietor, a partnership, a corporation, or an LLC. The default rule is that if you don't form either like an LLC or a corporation, then your business would be structured as either a sole proprietorship or a general partnership if there's multiple individuals. And then the risk that kind of comes along with that, with those two, is that by not forming a formal entity in a state, is that you don't have any shielding of your personal assets. So the LLC and the corporation benefits provide that personal asset liability. So the setting up the entity is really designed to do that, to help protect your personal assets, keep any of your business issues, so any contracts that you're negotiating, any loans you're securing, it really keeps your personal assets out of the reach of, I would say, those creditors or anyone that's coming.
It's almost like you're creating a new person. My business is now a separate thing. And any risks that happen in the business stay over there, and my stuff is over here.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you kind of get started out, I think people just, Especially having like an entrepreneurial spirit, you're ready to just kind of jump in and get things going, but really and truly kind of thinking about what it is that you're doing and making sure that anything personal that you're wanting to keep those things. It could be, your vehicles, your homes, your personal bank accounts, things like that, making sure that they are insulated against whatever activities your business is doing. And then there also could be some tax benefits that you maybe aren't taking advantage of if you're not an LLC or a corporation.
And what I see, here at the AWB firm, we look at legal as proportional to risk. And
Right.
so when you are just setting up your business for the first time, you might want to move fast and just get started. And so a lot of the times we might not recommend that you set up an LLC or corporation if you don't have a lot of personal assets or there's not much risk in the business to be worried about. And that is an example of that. Like if you never then revisit that decision as you're growing your business, that can catch up with you and cause problems later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is not something that you should just do and then never circle
Set
back.
it and forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how should a business owner protect their personal assets, that personal bank account, car, home, as their business is growing? So, past that initial phase into 6, 7 figures.
So the first step would be forming that formal business entity. So you would register either an LLC or a corporation in the state where you're located, and then also work to maintain like separate bank accounts. So you would kind of treat things like your business would be completely separate. You would not commingle, have one debit card that you're just kind of living off of everything. You would have your separate bank for your business. You would have an EIN. You would have insurance for your business to offer that extra layer of protection on things.
Ideally, not taking your salary out of your PayPal account,
Right.
making sure that there's really clear boundaries between the finances.
Yes, yes. You definitely want to be, that line needs to be very distinct that this is personal, this is the business, and that there's no commingling of those things.
And then, any other personal asset protection to think about as your business is growing?
Yeah, additional things would be to talk to an estate planning attorney to kind of discuss maybe whether there could be some additional benefits. If you want to maybe like put your personal assets into a trust or to really make sure that you're giving yourself that extra protection, just with depending on what the nature of your business and whether or not that would make sense for you. That's another kind of component that I would recommend.
Yeah, I'll give a personal example. I'm lucky to be in a 2 entrepreneur household. My husband is also an entrepreneur, and he's in real estate development and was working on a big deal that required a big loan with a personal guarantee. So that means even though he had an LLC set up, the bank basically said, yeah, we don't really want your LLC's assets. We want those personal assets. And so signing that personal guarantee, we met with an estate planning attorney because we don't do estate planning here to say, like, are there any additional protections that we can add knowing that our personal assets are on the line? And here in Tennessee, there were some things that we could do on that note. So that was helpful. Again, as you get into these more advanced levels of business, these advanced strategies become more important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Katie, if we did know a business owner who's maybe, hit that inflection point, mid 6 figures growing to 7, and they're still operating as a sole proprietor, tell me what risks is that going to present?
The biggest risk is that you don't have liability protection. So like we had mentioned, if you do secure a loan and you have a business loan and maybe it is secured through the business, right? They didn't ask for that personal guarantee on it. Without having a formal entity in place, if you defaulted on that, then your personal assets could get attached to that. So that is the biggest risk. You don't have any liability protection there. Similarly, you get, your business gets sued. Your personal assets then could be on the line.
And what we see with our clients who are online businesses is maybe you're having an event, a large event. So you're signing a large contract and you're like, even if you cancel, you're basically on the hook for those things for a hotel room block or the catering. Or if someone gets hurt at your event, that can be a really big risk.
Yeah, I definitely think, we talked about kind of doing that risk analysis, that it really does kind of depend on the nature of your business. I mean, if you're doing something and you're operating to where you are completely remote and maybe you're providing some sort of like a service for
Like
another
copywriting
business.
services,
Right,
something really low risk.
No, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like graphic design, like you're working at your computer, you're not going somewhere, you don't have a team in an office and hosting events. And so things like that, it's very minimal. So that might be pretty low risk. But yeah, like you said, if you're hosting in-person things, or if you're having like hiring big teams, or if you're signing big contract deals, not operating that as a sole proprietor, the risk for any of those issues attaching to you personally is big. And so making that change is definitely, at that point, I would say a good time to evaluate that and make that change.
Any other risks that someone should be thinking about to being a sole proprietor versus setting up an entity?
Um, it could make, I would say, also having, if you're wanting to potentially like partner with somebody or like get investors, things like that, it's not as easy to do that if you're operating as a sole proprietor. So that would make that more challenging. I would say there's probably also tax benefits that you're not taking advantage of too. So just kind of making that switch is a good first step. Typically, if you are, I would say, like a small business, a solopreneur, switching to an LLC is a good first step there.
That's great. Now tell me about partnerships. So we've been talking about sole proprietorships if you're a solopreneur. Let's say you do have a partner. Does that require any kind of specific legal structure?
So you're not required to have that. So you could just operate a partnership similar to your sole proprietor. But again, you don't have that personal liability protection there. So it's not the most ideal, I would say, in that scenario. Like typically, I mean, and of course, being an attorney, I'm like, you want to like paper it all and have it very clear with like roles and responsibilities outlined. But you're not getting that benefit of the liability protection. So, kind of if your partner is a little bit maybe more of a less risk averse person, they could be doing things like putting the business at risk, and your personal liability is attached there as well. So oftentimes I would say that an LLC or a corporation would be definitely the better fit for if you're looking at partnering and having that. Primarily just because with those, you would have either, if you're doing an LLC, an operating agreement, or a corporation, you would have bylaws. And that just outlines, you have just the written agreement there, kind of outlining everybody's like your roles, responsibilities, how you settle disputes, how profits are handled, if someone wants to exit the partnership, what that looks like. So that's all documented there, and you're not kind of working off of a handshake. Typically, those types of things, they always work fine until they don't. So making sure
And
that
that's what we see most of the time, the ones that
right.
don't. Yeah.
People are coming and they're saying, I started this and it was with my friend and it was very informal. But as things have grown, as you've become successful, not having it papered and not having that formality really, really isn't, it does more detriment, I would say, than benefit in the end.
Yeah. And we sometimes like to say that when you're forming a partnership, you're getting business married.
Mhm.
And so it's very easy to start, but it can be really hard to exit. And just like with getting married, there's all kinds of state laws. If you don't have an agreement, there are laws that will kind of put rules onto your relationship that you may not know about, and they may not be how you would want things to work. So, you might think long and hard also about whether you really do want a partnership, or if there's maybe a lower risk alternative like a revenue or profit share, collaborating. There's other options for sure.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay, so a question we get a lot is, are there any particular legal benefits to forming an LLC versus forming a corporation?
So I mentioned this before, like both offer you that liability protection. So number one, I would say that's, you have that same benefit on either. Um, the LLCs, I think they have much less formality. So when you have a corporation, there are certain requirements that you're required to maintain and to have to avoid, which you'll hear people sometimes talk about, like piercing the corporate veil. So there are certain things that you have to do, like you have to have board meetings, you have to have annual minutes, things recorded. With an LLC, you don't necessarily have to have that level of formality. So you're able to have more flexibility with your ownership, kind of how you manage, you have your operating agreement, how you distribute profits, that's kind of outlined there. For small businesses, those tend to be, I think an LLC is a little bit more easier just to operate day to day. Corporations do have benefits though as well, if you're kind of evaluating that. If typically what I'll ask clients when they're deciding like one or the other is it important for them to have investors? Like, are you looking at seeking like venture capital funding? Are you wanting to like issue shares of stock? Like, is that something that's in the realm of your mind? If you're wanting to look at an investor, then a corporation may be a better fit for you. There may be some tax advantage to that as well. But more often than not, just the flexibility that kind of comes with maintaining and owning and operating an LLC is a little bit easier, especially for small businesses.
Yeah. And we have seen the good news is nothing is ever really set in stone. So if you start with an LLC and then later you decide you want to take investors, of course, there's things that you could do to put yourself in a better position at that point without having to have all of that headache for all of those years that you weren't ready for that. Okay, this is another popular question. Should I set up my business in my home state? So let's say I live in Tennessee or in Delaware or Wyoming. I keep hearing about these states that are supposed to be really attractive for businesses.
So it depends. But more often than not, I would say your home state is probably going to be the best choice unless you have a really, really good like strategic reason for wanting to go out of state into somewhere like Delaware or Wyoming, like we mentioned. For a couple of factors, I would say, number one, compliance. So like Autumn and I are both in Tennessee, if we were to open and operate a company in Washington, like now I'm having to deal with staying and not only like knowing about all the regulations and requirements for businesses in Washington. So there's also that additional compliance for like operating a business there. And then for settling disputes, if there is, an issue that pops up and you're going to litigate something, do I then want to go to Washington and deal with that? Or would it be a better option for me to maintain that here? So in some instances, it may make sense if you have the capabilities and if it makes sense for your business, you could kind of look at that, but more often than not, your home state is the best. There's states like you asked about, like Delaware and Wyoming. There are benefits, like they have lower fees to come in and form businesses. Delaware, for example, a lot of people like that, especially for corporations. They're developed in commercial law, so there's a lot of legal precedent there. You're not going to have any judges that are kind of making decisions that are very kind of off kilter. Like everything is very decided, so there's rules, and you would kind of know what you would get when you're going there. Both very business friendly. Wyoming often has a benefit to where you don't actually have to identify the owners of the businesses when you're doing the formation documents. So if confidentiality is something that's important to you, then that would be a state that would be something to consider. But again, unless it's like a very strategic reason, just kind of typically staying close to home is a good option for you.
Yeah, I had a friend in a group that I'm in who is in California, which is one of the most expensive states to operate in. They have like an $800 fee. And she was saying, well, Delaware is so much cheaper. So if I just set up my company in Delaware, then I won't have to pay that California fee. But unfortunately, if you are sitting in an expensive state, you're still going to have to pay those fees. It's not a like magic bullet to get out of those.
No. And I mean, typically, like if you're in California and you're operating there, like you're going to end up having to register there as well. So there's going to be like that additional like foreign registration.
And now you've just really increased your bill, not decreased it.
Now you're doing double the work. So you really do have to kind of make a very strategic decision. I wouldn't say to just go because you've heard it's cheaper. Like it might not be at the end. So
yeah. Okay, so if I did want to change my business entity, as we mentioned, how does that affect my taxes?
So that is definitely a question for your tax advisor or your CPA. But so with changing your entity structure, what you can expect is that any change is going to affect how like your profits are taxed. You may have tax filings that are going to change if you're doing any quarterly tax payments or like year-end deductions, those types of things. That's going to be affected with the change in your formation. So I think you should just go into it knowing that there are going to be some tax changes, and you should work with your tax advisor on that so that then you can get ahead of it and you're not going to be surprised if you have like an unexpected tax bill, if you're going from like a more advantageous tax structure to a less advantageous for your business. So there will be an effect. So you should definitely speak to them.
I will say we work really collaboratively with our clients, other kind of their bench of advisors. And so we like our spidey senses go up when someone says they want to make a change. Like, have you talked to your tax advisor? Because we don't give that advice, but we want to make sure that you are getting good advice before you're making these decisions willy-nilly.
Yes, most often, I think in every message when talking to a client about their entity, I say, well, what does your CPA like? Talk to them about this. Or, like,
it's like two sides of the coin.
Question.
Yes.
Yeah, you almost do need to have kind of that just like collaborative discussion because it is a three party chat almost.
For sure. Okay, so we've been kind of tiptoeing around the S-Corp question. So what are the benefits? Can you lay out if I have a regular LLC now and I want to switch to an S-Corp?
Yeah, so this question comes up a lot. And that's interesting that you mentioned that about the taxes, because I do wonder if that's kind of why, because I do feel like you kind of get a flurry of people asking about this. So that's probably why, is because they're like, wait a
They
second.
heard their friend say they
Yeah.
saved $20,000. Yes.
Yeah, and so people will come to us sometimes even and ask, like, I want to form an S corp. Well, an S corp is actually just a tax designation that you're electing, so it doesn't actually change like your entity structure itself. So you would either be an LLC or a corporation, and you're just taxed as an S corp. So the advantage to that is there's some potential tax savings there, but that is a discussion that you need to have with your CPA or your tax advisor to determine whether or not that's the right choice for you. With an LLC, you're typically paying like self-employment taxes on profits. And so with the
As the owner. Yeah.
as the owner, yeah. And so with the S corp election, only the salary that's paid, the owner is then converted like to an employee, and you're paid a salary. So then that salary is kind of what is subject to the employment taxes. So then you get to write off some of the rest. So there is a tax advantage to that.
And that self-employment tax is significant. It's like 15.3%. So the goal is always you want to pay that on as little money as you can. But I'll tell you, it's important to run the numbers because we sit in Tennessee. Every state law is different. Like for our business, I think I was at like year 8, and I had my accountant run the numbers every single year, and it did not make any savings until about year 8 of running the firm. And I think that was our $1 million year. So, it was just because of the way the state taxes were set up at that time, it was kind of, didn't really accomplish much. But in another state, it may have kicked in with benefits before that.
Yeah. So that is definitely something. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you, I was like, from your personal perspective, I know that's something
Yes.
that you've evaluated, that you've mentioned that like
Yeah.
year to year, you and your CPA will review that and say, like, does it make sense
He
to
has a
you?
magic spreadsheet where he like punches everything in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another important caveat to think about that, because you had mentioned about kind of the change that goes into it, is that when you're taxed as an S corp, then the owner is on payroll. And so with that, you do have to base the salary. It has to be like a reasonable salary that's based on industry standards. So
You can't just pay yourself $12.
yes, you cannot just like pay yourself a very minuscule salary to avoid taxes. So the IRS is definitely onto that. So that is a discussion that you should have, just a close discussion with your CPA, and kind of run the numbers, see if it makes sense. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't, and you can evaluate it again next year.
And there is an administrative burden. Like if you don't have any other employees, so you don't have payroll set up, that is, an additional cost, an additional step. It's not a big deal. But just again, you don't get all these benefits without a little bit of work.
Yes. Yeah, always a trade-off.
Yeah, for sure. And then tell me, how does timing work? Like, are there deadlines for that S-Corp election? Can people mess it up?
Well, yeah, with everything, you can definitely mess it up. There is a deadline in which you have to file that IRS form.
It depends on when the entity is set. It's not a hard deadline.
Okay.
Yeah, it kind of floats. But
Okay.
again, you want to make sure you're talking with someone who can help you figure out when that deadline is so that you hit it for the year that you want to claim it.
Yes, and that you're planning for that. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah. And same thing with setting up an entity. It often makes more sense to kind of time that either to year end, where you can have like a nice clean break. So you're not trying to figure out like halfway, I'm an S Corp for half the year, and it just gets very messy.
Yes.
So what is involved? Let's say, again, it's moving season. Let's say I do decide to move to a different state. Can I just pick up my entity and bring it with me if I want to move from Tennessee to Colorado?
As nice as that would be, it's unfortunately not that easy to do that.
If only.
The states do not communicate with each other. Like, each state has its own process and department with which you're having to file things. And so it is not as simple to just pick things up and do that. We have seen so many issues especially related to moving with clients.
I would say this is like a flashing light, like big trouble area to point out to people.
Yeah.
Because we've had to clean up a lot of these messes, and it's very expensive to clean it up if you do it the wrong way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and we have had clients that have come to us and said, like, not had let us know that, they had planned this move. They had just done it and try to, do it themselves, because you think, I can just like file this.
How hard can it be?
That. And they've ended up either forming they have two different businesses now. So they have like two distinct entities and trying to figure out like what to do with that. We've also had somebody who had dissolved their entity unintentionally. So they had moved states, thought they moved their entity, actually just shut the whole thing down. And so she'd been operating her business, had no idea that she had dissolved it. So we had to go back in and try and get everything back up. So it's definitely not, it seems in theory that it would be a little bit simpler, but it is not.
Yeah. So what are those steps? Let's say when someone comes to talk to us and we help them do this the right way, what does that look like?
Yeah. So with us, like as an example, like if we're in Tennessee and you come and you say, like, I want to move, I'm thinking about moving to Georgia. What do I need to do? So we would look at registering your entity in your new state. So either as like a foreign entity registration is typically kind of a first step to do.
So you keep your original state entity and you just kind of like tell Georgia, I'm keeping my Tennessee entity. I'm telling Georgia, hey, I'm going to be here now.
Yeah. I mean, you don't
Kind of a dipping your toe in. Yeah.
don't necessarily need to uproot the whole thing just because you're moving. You can leave your entity existing where it is and then register and exactly let Georgia know, like, hey, I'm here, I'm operating here, so I can file lawsuits here. I have employees here, like I'm running my business here. So you have the benefit of being able to work in both. And then what some states have, not all states have this, but some states do have the ability to where you can like domesticate that foreign entity into a domestic entity in that state.
Where you really can magically pick it up and put it down in the new state.
Yeah, and there's some like reciprocals, like Tennessee, Georgia is a good example where I believe that's still a possibility to where you could have a Tennessee entity, file the foreign, and then you convert it. And you're like, well, now my foreign Tennessee one. So there's no real like breaks in the entity. It kind of continues on in existence. You don't have to like shut one down, reopen the other. So that is a nice benefit that's available in some states, but it's not possible in all, unfortunately.
They don't make it easy. Yeah. These laws were not passed in a time of frequent moves and digital nomads. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, no, it is. It is all very like state specific, and there's like different like agencies within the different states, and there's different, forms, and some require certificates, others don't. So it's just a lot of complexity. And you would think even with like neighboring states, they would be similar, but they're not. They're not. The rules are all different.
So how far ahead of a move should someone be thinking about this and contacting their CPA and their lawyer to talk about making these changes?
As far in advance as possible, I would say, as soon as you know your move is going to happen, to go ahead and start having that discussion, kind of determining then, because too, strategically, like you had mentioned that it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do to kind of shut everything down or ramp everything up like mid-year. Like you may want to close books and do certain things. Yeah. So as soon as you know, I would say that's a good point.
Start making a plan.
Having those, and get your plan in place so then you can determine whether or not, like what moves you need to make, when it would make the best sense to do those too, timing wise.
Yeah, we have definitely had projects here that have been 6 months or longer to do this whole process of moving an entity or setting up a new one. So
yes, and there's a lot of components. I mean, we have like you have the state registration and those formation type things, to think about. But also on the other side, you have like if you are forming a new entity in another state, if the state doesn't allow like domestication there, then you're looking at having to go through the whole process of getting like updated tax IDs, having to get new bank accounts. You would need to really look at your contracts and see like what needs to change, if anything, because now you're a different entity in another state, and kind of evaluate all those. So it's not as easy to just kind of like flip the switch and make the change. There's some work that's going to go into it.
Yeah. And we have had a few clients who have moved and basically just didn't really make any changes for the first couple of years because of this reason. Like they wanted to really make sure they were going to stay before they uprooted everything and went through all this work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's something too to ask of like how long term of.
Are you sure?
Yeah, because you can. I mean, you have the ability to register as a foreign entity in a new state. And I mean, there may be a requirement for you to file like an annual report and pay some additional fees that go along with it. But that compared to completely
all
like
of this
uprooting
work.
and doing it, that is a slow.
Especially if you think you might move back or this is maybe a temporary stopover, maybe you're just not totally sure. Yeah.
Yeah, or moving again.
Okay, so another hot topic that we've been getting a lot of questions about are, especially as our clients are getting into that 7, 8 figure mark, is a holding company. So what are holding companies and why would a business owner need one? What is it going to either accomplish or help them? What problems is it going to help them avoid?
Yeah. So a holding company is a business that owns another business. So you think of it from like a parent subsidiary type relationship. They own a holding company may own something like real estate. They may own intellectual property. They may house all your employees, things like that. And so when you're doing, you think about the formation documents that you would put like owners of the company, like and the original business would then own all the subsidiaries. And then sitting on top of that, you would have the individuals that own the original company. So rather than kind of having like the distinct little like arrows, I would say, from each owner to the distinct companies, it kind of like trickles down. So you have that ownership line between the parent and all of the subsidiaries. So the benefits to that, there are some that definitely it helps to separate assets and liabilities because again, you're talking about two like distinct or multiple distinct entities. So that can help to protect your core business, especially if you're looking at doing something that's a little bit riskier or maybe totally outside the scope of what it is that you do now. Like you may have, like if we have an online business, like many of our clients do, and you're looking at, opening a separate skydiving business, like you may want to have that separate. There may be some
A lot
mingling.
more risk with your skydiving
Right.
adventure.
There may be some mingling of like your staff, or you may want to, give some rights for your intellectual property, things like that. So you would have the parent company like manage all of those type of core assets and then give it like limit things to the subsidiary. So you still have like separate bank accounts, separate operations, things like that. Like it's still different entity filings, things like that, but it helps to shield your assets and your liabilities that way. There is a benefit to those as well too with tax reporting. So if when we have clients that come and say like, I think like, what if I want to form this new entity, but what if I did it as like a holding company, or what if I made my company own the new entity I want to own? I always tell them like, we'll talk about the benefits here, but the next person you need to be calling is your CPA and see what they say. Because typically if they have very strong opinions about like why it would be of benefit, then I'll say like, let's explore that further.
Mhm.
But more often than not, I think there's a lot of complexity that comes with those. There's a big administrative burden that comes with maintaining a holding company and that parent
Mhm.
subsidiary. And a lot of times I think that can outweigh that benefit. Um, and more often than not, you can operate, two separate distinct entities, kind of
Just
just
as
totally
easily. Yeah.
separate. Yeah, owned by one individual as opposed to owned by the entity and kind of achieve your same goal. So I think that's another one that like don't just do it because everybody else you're hearing other people are doing it. Like
Yes.
you need to have very it is a very strategic decision and there should be very specific reasons that it would make sense to do that.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend who's in a mastermind with me who was talking about that she set up an IP holding company, and I asked her why, and she could not tell me. And so, and she had done it herself. It was not something she'd like worked with a legal strategist on. And so I think she just heard, she was like, well, my IP should be in a holding company. Like that's just what we do. And I was like, I mean, maybe, but we
Yeah.
really want to think through because, like you said, none of this is free. Like it's going to add paperwork, there's filing fees, there's legal fees. And so it can absolutely make sense in certain situations, but maybe not always. So
Yeah.
definitely
Well,
not something to DIY.
no, no, absolutely not. I mean, I think from, if you're looking at like if you have a big team and you're looking at, operating different businesses and you're like, I'm gonna have my admin staff is gonna totally help this other and they're gonna run, all of the admin for this other entity rather than having it to where you're having like separate employment agreements and having like a bunch of part-timers kind of working for different and managing different payroll.
Yeah, trying to figure out which entity they're working for when gets very
Right.
messy.
It would make sense then to have the holding company like lease employees to your other entities, but that's not typically like I don't we haven't had that scenario pop up very often like with our clients where we
Yeah.
say that really makes a lot of sense. Like you're just not having that kind of layer of complexity within your organizational structure that the
I mean, we have clients at 20 million plus. So I like even at that level,
yeah.
we are not seeing this that often.
No, not to where the benefit we would say like, yes, absolutely.
Outweighs the, yeah,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
paperwork. Okay, so let's say I have had a growth spurt in my business. So how do I know if my current entity structure is still the right fit for my business? What are some things I should look at?
Um, so kind of a little bit, I would say, of self-reflection as to what has changed since when you formed your entity. So if it's had been 3 years ago since you started, your goals probably have changed, kind of what you expected, maybe even what it is that you're doing now has changed from what
Yeah.
it was when you started. So kind of thinking about that, like how your business has evolved over the course of time from when you first started to where you are now. You should definitely look at kind of your profits, your team size, what liability exposure do you have from based on what you're doing. Um, if you now have maybe a level of managers, like maybe you have a C-suite, but before it was just you. Kind of looking at that and to say like, okay, is there more risk now with my business than it was when it first started? That may be a good point to kind of determine whether or not you need to make a change. Again, your goals, you may want to talk to your CPA. They're always a great one to ask about. Maybe there is a tax advantage that if you did restructure that with where you are now, kind of how you're operating, if tax laws have changed, that there may be a benefit that you're not taking advantage of, um, that you should be.
Yeah. And then what about like the types of activities that a business is doing? Are there specific things that you might want to like, again, like your spidey sense goes up if there's particular risks that you might have?
Yes. Anything, I mean, I think about from the context of like the likelihood of an injury, the like how
Or something
big, like
going really wrong. Yeah.
yeah. So if you're having any, like maybe now you're hosting like in-person events, or you're doing team retreats, or you're doing like large conferences, or maybe you've started to build your team, and so you're having kind of more of that layer of management. You're working in an office now, and that you're like leasing out space, and so people are coming in person, whereas before you were just working out of your house and it was just you behind your computer and your keyboard. So those types of changes, again, like the activities that you're doing, it could completely change, especially if it's changed from where you started to where you get here. I often hear that with a lot of clients is that, the thing that they thought they kind of were going to do is not where they've ended up a couple years later.
Yes, for sure. So how can entity structure affect your ability to sell or bring on investors? What are some of the potential downsides if you have the wrong entity structure?
It definitely will affect your business's valuation. So when you think about that from the aspect of like how appealing is my business, like from an outsider's like critical perspective and looking into your entity. Um,
Warts and all.
yeah, I mean, they're going to want to look at, if you're having someone that's going to come on and they're going to want to invest money, or if you have a potential buyer wanting to come in and acquire your business, they are going to want to see behind everything. They're going to want to look at your books, they're going to want to know how your contracts, they're going to want to see your bank accounts, they're going to want to have a look into all of your records. And so making sure that your entity, I mean, if that is one component, like hopefully you would have a great bookkeeper and a CPA that is keeping all of that tidy. But on your entity side, having your operating agreement, if you have an LLC in place and having that filed, if you have a corporation, like having your annual minutes recorded and all of that, filed away the way that it's supposed to, having all those organizational documents and things in place, having your annual registrations that they're done timely, all of that just makes your business much more attractive to investors. They look at it and they're like, all right, this person has their stuff together, like they know what they're doing. They've been running this business. When if it's a sole proprietor, not to say that it's not as like that it affects the valuation, that it's not as like appealing, but just having that paperwork, I think, makes it look as well like a little bit more legit. If it's unclear, like if you're in a partnership and it's kind of unclear, like we've just been doing this,
Right.
like, well, but
No written agreement, or you have an agreement that you signed 10 years ago and things have totally changed.
yeah,
You've
or like
changed your
maybe.
percentages or you've brought on another partner. It can get
Right,
really messy.
exactly. That's what I was going to say. You've had another partner, like the people have kind of come in and out and things have
Mhm.
gone. So it kind of that I think that is really a red flag to any potential like investor or buyer. So wanting to make sure that your entity is neat and tidy. Buyers want to make sure they're going to have, like, they're not going to come in and inherit a mess. They're going to have
Right.
liability protection. They're going to know that whatever intellectual property that you have, that there's no restrictions on it. They're going to be able to like transfer that and work with it. So they're going to want to comb through everything. So that definitely is important if you're, especially as you're considering kind of the next steps for your business, to make sure that that's all papered and your files are in good shape too.
Yeah, because they're buying kind of a risk,
Yeah.
and they want that risk to be as low as possible.
Yeah. Or you may end up, at the end of it, if they're investing, you may end up with a lesser investment, or if you're
Mhm.
selling
A
lower
lower
number
price.
because they don't,
Mhm.
yeah. Having that really helps to kind of bolster.
Or it may just cost you a lot too during due diligence to get all of that kind of put together and figured out, which is a time when you probably don't want to be spending a lot of money and energy on something you could have done much less expensively
Yeah,
earlier
absolutely.
on.
Yeah. If you're trying to like run and make sure and get all the things done that they want to make sure they had papered before. Yeah, that would be a big expense to
A
kind of
huge
take
headache.
on that you hadn't previously planned for.
Yeah. All right. Last question, Katie. So, what is my best next step if I want to rethink or restructure my business?
The first step that you should do if you're wanting to restructure your business is to either talk to your tax advisor and your attorney. If you don't have one, I would say start looking. Not something that you should do by yourself. So definitely start to have those conversations. Be thinking about what your goals are, kind of where your business is, like profit wise. Evaluate your current structure. We kind of talked about like, is making a change good for me? Like, has my business kind of evolved over time? And then map out, think about what are the pros and cons of each. And again, that's something that an attorney can help you, kind of evaluate with looking at from a liability perspective. And then you can have your CPA kind of give you from the tax view on that as well, and determine like, is this change a good one for me to make at this time? When should we, make this change? Should we do this now? We need to wait till the end of the year. Like, kind of at what point should we do these? So, you definitely don't want to wait until the end of the year or until
Christmas
like
Eve
taxes
is a
are done.
great, or New Year's Eve
Yeah,
for
you
those last
definitely.
minute changes. You do not want to be the one trying to get in line with your attorney or your CPA right during the holiday season to make these changes.
Yeah, or right at the start, like right in the middle of tax season, especially. So, I mean, you mentioned that you have just, come off of a meeting with the group, but having people kind of chattering about tax, like, well, now seems like a good time. We're already in
Yeah,
April.
CPAs love working on these kinds of projects in the spring and summer after tax season because they're getting their act back together, getting rested, and before it's time for the next big push.
Yeah.
Okay, I see we have a question in the chat. So if an owner moves just themselves, their person, to another state, does the business entity have to move too? So let's say I just buy, we're in Chattanooga, which is right on the Georgia line. Let's say I buy a house right over the line in Georgia. Do I have to move my entity from Tennessee?
You do not have to move your entity, and it's certainly not a decision that you have to make right away. So if you move to Georgia, typically, like we discussed, how long is that planning? Is it something temporary? Is that a long-term move? In the interim, we could do that foreign entity registration. So let the state know, Georgia, that you're operating there.
And what are the risks if I don't do that registration, Katie? What could go wrong? What are the problems that we've seen when clients are operating in a new state but have not
Yeah.
taken that step to register?
Yeah, so typically that will come up, and this is again another one where it's very nuanced that like each state has its different requirements as far as like what's considered doing business as in the state. So if you are considered doing business as in a state, then you would need to register as a foreign entity. So most often, like just operating, having employees there, that's enough to kind of trigger that nexus. Where most people get into an issue is when you've not done that foreign registration. So you've also not set up any tax accounts that you're supposed to. And then the state agencies, it may take them a little while, but they will realize that maybe that you've been operating here, have not been registering, paying taxes. And so that is where that will kind of chime up.
And there can be penalties. Like it's not like you just get all those years scot-free. Some of the states have very stiff penalties for all those years you should have been registered and didn't.
Yes, there are some states it is thousands per year.
Yeah.
And so it'll start, they'll look at like the date from when you were here and just tack those on. So you can't necessarily just skirt by or think like, we'll see until they catch us, because they do backdate. They'll look at kind of like when you were there and when that happened. And then the other benefit is that, if you're in that state and you've moved, having that foreign qualification allows you to bring lawsuits. You can always defend yourself there in those states. But if you were wanting to maybe like pursue a suit there, or have change your contract and negotiate your certain client agreement, or a third party agreement, and agree to settle disputes in that state. Well, if you were going to want to initiate one, you have to have that foreign qualification. You can't just kind of get the benefit of operating there without letting the state know and
that's the
paying your fee.
incentive.
Yeah, you got to pay your fee to do it. So,
Yeah.
But yes, you do not have to do that. You
Just
don't
because
have to move
you don't have to move your business just because your
just
person
because
moved.
you move. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So as we wrap up, if this sparked even a little bit of uncertainty about your business's structure, now is a great time to address it while our CPAs are all quiet and resting and relaxing before the next tax season, before you want to bring on a partner, or before you hit another big growth phase. I know a lot of our clients have fall launches. And so spring and summer is a great time to work on these kind of behind the scenes, back end admin projects before you get into those heavy marketing seasons. So that is exactly the type of problem that our legal roadmap sessions are designed for. So how that works, we will audit your current setup. We will flag hidden risks, and we'll give you a prioritized plan to fix it. You're not going to have to guess. You're not going to have to Google anything. And you can really we like to say that we kind of take it off of your plate and put it onto our plate. This is not something that at this stage of your business you need to be figuring out by yourself. It's really time to hire that bench of advisors to help you make good decisions and avoid these expensive problems that can happen when you're DIYing. So we only open 4 legal roadmap sessions a month to make sure that we can give really excellent support to all of these clients. So if you want clarity now, go ahead and apply. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if this works, and show a QR code. So if you are watching later, Rachel is going to drop a link in the chat, but if you're watching this later, hopefully you're seeing this, and you can just grab this QR code with your phone, and that will take you right there so that you can risk-proof your revenue today. All right, thank you for joining us today. We will see you next month on Answers with Autumn.